Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about a struggle as old as time, an eternal conflict between two forces that has been waged across forums and subreddits for years. And of course, I'm talking about the battle between hardcore and casual players. Now, before I really say anything at all, I want to be clear that it's not really a strict dichotomy. We don't just have, the dad gamers that have, a couple hours a week and they're still doing the campaign versus absolute neats that have been sitting in their mom's basement and have probably killed Uber Lilith more than they've showered. It's not just those kinds of players. There's going to be a vast majority of players that fall somewhere in the middle. And honestly, you might lean one way or another, but you're not just going to be there's not just two camps. The reason why this always props up of like casual and hardcore gamers comes down to when we create games, what are we hoping that that game is balanced around? Is it balanced around a more casual gamer base, or is it trying to appeal to a more competitive or a more hardcore audience is going to dedicate a larger amount of time to the game? In Diablo 4, I've noticed that a lot of people will write off some of the problems that people have brought up as, well, that's just because you're a hardcore gamer. That's just because you've been playing for for a huge amount of time. And thank God that I'm just a casual gamer. I don't have to deal with any of those issues. And you're ruining the game because you've been playing it for hundreds of hours. And while that may appear to be true, in Diablo 4, a lot of the problems that are experienced by hardcore players will eventually also be problems experienced by the casual player base as well. The hardcore players just act as like an early warning sign because they've hit the point in the game where those problems are actually emerging. So why is this the case in Diablo 4, but in other games there's such a big push of let's not cater to the hardcore audience, we should cater to casuals, and I agree, we probably should try to build the game for casual players as well. But when we look at like an esport like League of Legends, for example, a lot of really good characters in League of Legends who are incredibly powerful at, the competitive scene and see a lot of gameplay and professional, they end up getting nerfed and that affects the entire game as a whole. As a result, you'll see some characters with like less than 40% win rate on the normal ladder that most people are playing on because in the professional scene they are just so good when actually being played with like a coordinated team. We can also compare this to something like World of Warcraft, where a lot of bosses and raids were just not designed to be cleared on week 1 by the world first guilds. And so your gameplay there is fundamentally different than what most people are experiencing. In fact, most people probably won't ever step foot into the highest level raid at all. There's a level of difficulty that's also a barrier that's stopping a casual player base from actually experiencing that content. Either way, what a casual player and a hardcore player are experiencing is fundamentally two different pieces of content. Diablo 4 is a little bit different. There's nothing that really exists. There's no huge, steep difficulty curve that's prohibiting people from reaching the problems that many hardcore players have experienced so far. Really, the only difference is going to be time. And again, that's why the hardcore players, they have hit these problems simply because they've invested more time into the game and eventually all of the casuals, all of the dad gamers, they will experience this as well. As kind of an example here of what I mean, let's imagine we took a bunch of people and we had them run a marathon. There's some world-class athletes and just, some casuals who are there having fun on their weekend. Now, the world-class athletes get to the end of the race and they say, "Hey, you know what? That was great and all, but it was really annoying that at mile 25 there was a swamp with crocodiles on it." Now, if you ask the regular people who are still halfway through the race, they might say, "Well, I haven't seen any crocodiles yet, so I don't know what the problem is. What are these guys complaining about?" That doesn't mean that the problems don't exist. It's simply a matter of fact that you haven't experienced it yet, or you've just quit before you've experienced. That's why these problems are so much worse for the casual player, because when the casual runners get to the swamp with crocodiles, they're not even gonna bother progressing through that. They're gonna just see that and say, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm not touching that," right? So in Diablo 4, what are these problems? Well, probably the biggest one is that there's very little progress outside of leveling. I don't think that's going to be appealing for a casual player who might not have a lot of time to actual level. Even if you played for about an hour or two, you might get maybe 1.5 levels, which translates to like 6 Paragon points. That might be like 20 strength and like one node or something. Maybe you're getting like 5% physical damage. That's not a lot of progress compared to somebody who might have 5 or 6 hours and they might be able to level up, 5 or 6 times in that session. So it's important when we think about how fun is the game is to also track your progress per session. Basically, how much stronger is my character from when I started playing to when I finished my session for that day. And I don't think that in the end game, casual players are going to get that same feeling of actually having made a lot of progress because so much of it again is based on leveling. Gear is just not as big of a component in the end game once you've kind of got all your ancestral pieces. Now, for a hardcore player, it might be fun to go and parse through hundreds and hundreds of yellows searching for perfect rolls, and they might have more time to do that as well. But for a casual, I don't think they really care about getting absolute bisque gear with perfect rolls on every single stat. For them, they just kind of want like pretty decent gear that lets their build function, which I think is way too easy to achieve and doesn't leave much room for gear progression past that. And in general, I don't think a casual is going to enjoy having to read through, hundreds of yellows. It's just going to take up so much time from an already limited amount of time that they have to play. Now, I will say that building your Paragon board is really fun. I've had a lot of people tell me that they've really enjoyed playing around with the Paragon board and experimenting with it, but this requires a lot of time to actually go and get your Paragon board set up. It's also very difficult to actually play around with your Paragon board and experiment it in the game itself. You're often relying on using an external site. So when I say that I spent like 5 or 6 hours in one night trying to get my Paragon board set up, none of that was actually playing the game. It was all done through like d4builds.gg or something like that. It's all external planners. If you're a casual gamer, you just want to play the game. I don't think you want to sit and devote more time than you might have in one night to just sit and get your Paragon board perfected. You're probably just going to go and look up a build at that point because the complexity of actually getting your whole Paragon board set up is going to be a lot harder than you actually have time to do. A lot of my Path of Exile players, you probably know what I mean. When some of your builds probably spend more time in Path of Building, actually getting it all set up and making sure it works there, than you actually did playing the game and getting to, play your character, which is what most people want to do. So the question then is, when does this drop off occur? Because again, if it happens, 2,000 hours into the game, is it really that big of a deal? And we've all seen the Steam reviews that have somebody complaining about a game that they've dumped 2,000 hours into. And at that point, it might be fair. Hey, you probably do need a break. For me, for Diablo 4, I would say this happens about 60 to 80 hours, which correlates roughly to about level 60 to 80. And I'm being a little generous there. I think it could be less if you kind of know what you're doing. Now, is this a good product? Absolutely. I would say that just about anybody who plays this game could get a solid 100 hours playing the game. But in terms of longevity, in terms of like keeping this game as something that's going to sustain for multiple years, because again, this is Blizzard. This is a AAA release that should be kind of like a capstone game for them. I think that it is going to suffer a lot in sustaining that player base as they hit those problems. I simply don't think that casual players are going to keep playing the game past the 100 hours. They might make a new character or two, but for the most part, that plateau that you hit towards the end game is still going to be very noticeable for most players, even casual players, and especially for them as well. Now, you might be thinking, well, what about seasons? Maybe seasons are built with that in mind. You play for, 60 to 80 hours and then you're done for the season. You come back the next season. That's how I played a lot of Diablo 3. I don't think that this is actually going to help casual players as much as it's going to appeal to hardcore players. And I've already seen this reflected in the forums where a lot of casual players simply don't like the idea of seasons because they don't like the idea of having a character that they've spent about a month on with limited time, and now they're going to have to make a new one to play the new seasonal content. The issue here is that a hardcore player might have a lot more time to play within that season. So the idea of leveling your character again, getting your renown again, is just going to be a drop in the bucket compared to their overall playtime. Whereas if you're a casual player and you just finished the campaign or something, the idea that when the season starts, you're going to have to do that all over again. It's a bit of a daunting idea. So I don't think that seasons are going to be that fix for casual players is going to keep them coming back for more and more and never actually hitting that end game. I think a lot more casual players are actually going to stick to the Eternal Realm, just building their character over and over again. And they're going to run into these problems at one point or another. So, does this mean that the game is doomed long term? Not at all. I'm very confident that over time, more content will be integrated and really smooth out that level 80 to 100 um, plateau and add more content for people to do, more tangible goals they can progress in. Because again, right now, outside of Uber Lilith, which is not going to be accessible to like 99% of players, I don't really think that there's a lot of end game content to strive for. Hopefully, Blizzard will understand this and they'll add that. But in the meantime, I think it's important to realize that when hardcore players or people who have spent, a couple hundred hours in the game so far, when they bring up these problems, it's not to make the game catered to hardcore players, but to just make the game better for everybody overall. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.